Good evening. This is Professor Rush once again with part 2 of my expose on Islam, or things your mother, the local imam, and the liberal press forgot to tell you. In this segment, I want to consider passages from the Quran, more specifically war verses, and the question of their relevance in the modern world. As I stated in the last series on Christianity, there's no such thing as fundamental Islam, extremist Islam, moderate Islam, or reform Islam. There is only Islam. Why is this? Well, it's simple. For strictly political purposes, the Quran is erroneously believed to be the divine word of the Islamic god, Aliyah, the moon god of war. And this psychotic god demands absolute obedience, that is, slavery to the god. So, how then do you reform such a tradition? How do you retranslate the war verses? How do you remove the statements promoting slavery? How does one move Islam into the modern world? Well, you can't. And unless there is public and worldwide announcement of reform and movement away from war and conquest, Islam will die out. Now, the adherents to this tradition can wear many masks. That is to say, Muslims come in many varieties, all the way from the insane imams who promote terrorism and those who follow their dictates to those who are Muslim in name only. Yes, it is the imams and other religious clerics who promote the killing of men, women, and children. Individuals do not act on their own. Orders always come from higher up. Now, some of you may say that I'm being insensitive with the cartoons that follow. Well, in part 3, I will show you some Islamic-derived cartoons, and you can decide who is insensitive. We are told by imams and certain Islamic scholars that Islam is the religion of peace, but that is far, far from the truth of the matter. Islam is a tradition, not a religion, a tradition of conquest. Remember from earlier presentations that a true religion is an individual matter, as it only can be, that is, one person's piety toward a deity or deities. Religion has nothing to do with what you wear, eat, how you pray, who you hang out with, who you hate, and who you're supposed to kill. The definition offered by sociologists and some anthropologists is so general as to be meaningless. Islam is a pragmatic tradition that will do what is necessary to succeed in taking over the world, which includes terror in the form of threats, intimidation, blowing people up, cutting off people's heads and other forms of dismemberment, rape, whatever it takes. You see, once you get rid of everyone who disobeys, then you have peace. Sinister in a way, but it also suggests that nothing is happening. When everyone is praying, there's peace, but nothing's happening. No independent thoughts, no conflict of wills, and the system eventually stagnates and dies along with the people who don't disobey. Islam, like fundamental Judaism and Christianity, see people as a herd of sheep, which is not the case. Humans are a small group animal, and as a small group animal, there's always someone who will disobey and go beyond the myths of a society, especially in times of need. Islam, like Judaism and Christianity, is out of step with our biology and the world as we know it. Just as with Judaism and Christianity, through its own behavior and lack of critical thinking, it will die out. The sentiments connected to our mythic hero Jesus will never die out. Perhaps one day they'll be fashionable. Now, this is not a plug for Christianity, far from it. Christianity, in its fundamental condition, is in the same camp as Islam. Before I get started, let me state that I have been accused of being Islamophobic by liberal academics. My statements about Judaism or Christianity are not awarded the same type of name-calling. The history of conquest and cruelty of this tradition is well documented, but ignored or pushed aside as some sort of minor aberration. But yes, I confess I am concerned, just as I have strong concerns about the Nazi Party, the Ku Klux Klan, communism, the Catholic Church, and other fundamentalist groups such as the Mormons and the cult of Obama. All these groups promote slavery, suppression of the rights of the individual, suppressing free expression, and violent reprisal to those who refuse to submit. Shouting Islamophobia is a form of political correctness, a method of stifling free speech. It is Islam that is phobic. And I call this aletheia-phobia, from the Greek meaning fear of the truth. The fact is that most Muslims are very weak in their faith for their tradition. For those of strong faith would have little emotional conflict when presented cartoons or statements and facts that contradict the historicity of Islam, or statements or cartoons that point out the cruelty and objectives of Islam. What is the phrase? O ye of little faith. To have faith in Islam, however, is to have faith in terrorism, that terrorism will lead to peace, and it is unlikely that reasonable people believe this. Here in this slide we see the 5 pillars of Islam. What is most interesting about these pillars is what you don't see. There's nothing in these pillars outside of giving to the poor and perhaps enslaving them in the process, as has happened with the welfare system in the United States, that suggests anything about human decency. Perhaps we could add a few riders here. The first pillar is declaring one's faith to Allah, but let's add a rider. But communing with your favorite energy that informs all is okay. Just be decent to others. Pillar number 2 is Salah, which is praying 5 times a day. But if you would rather take a walk and smell the roses, do some yoga and meditate on who you are and why a rose smells so good, then that's okay as well. How about zakat, or the giving of alms, but with a condition that the taker should contribute something of worth to the community. After all, it's the community that's giving the alms. Saum is fasting during Ramadan. But if you don't want to fast, at least reflect on depriving yourself of a little ego. And then think about improving your knowledge base. You know, math, physics, archaeology. A mind is a terrible thing to waste. And then the 5th pillar is the Hajj, or pilgrimage to Mecca, at least once in one's lifetime. Or go look at the pyramids, or visit the Louvre, or any large museum, and wonder at the depth of knowledge and all we've had to go through to get here. Now, with my additions, you have a choice, or perhaps I'm deluded in thinking that having a choice is adaptive. Now, besides the pillars of Islam, the basic tenets of this tradition are, first of all, fear of Allah. Allah is an insecure, psychotic bully, and the celestial representation of the politic that stands below it. All one has to do is check out the behavior of the major rulers in the Middle East to understand this. The now deceased Saddam Hussein, Mubarak, King Saud, Gaddafi, Ahmadinejad, the puppet of the Ayatollah, Bashar al-Assad of Syria, on and on. All carbon copies of Allah, insecure, paranoid, sadistic, power-hungry, and psychotic. These are rulers, not leaders, who surround themselves with people dumber than themselves, people who are willing to carry out orders irrespective of the inhuman consequences. Next on the list is institutionalized violence against anyone who questions the motives of Islam in a modern world. As you can see in this image, many of the protesters seemed disinterested and were more than likely threatened, and their families threatened with bodily harm if they didn't show up for the protest. Don't be fooled. All Muslims aren't in on this, but because violence toward infidels is sanctioned by Allah, disobeying the imam and other religious clerics can result in nasty consequences. Violence to all infidels comes through in the Quran with the numerous sword verses, as the scholars call them. For example, Surah 2:194. The sacred month for the sacred month, but violation of sacred ordinances only in retaliation. Whoever transgresses against you, transgress against him. But fear God, for know that God is with the God-fearing. This verse allows Muslims to spindle, mutilate, and kill all those who speak out against their tradition of fascism, their tradition of terror. Disputing the history is grounds for death. A show of weakness, as seen in the policies of Obama and other politicians, leads to aggression. The only thing the Islamic leaders understand is raw power, raw force. That is the only thing they respect. Giving money to Egypt and Pakistan and so on is a sign of weakness. It's like we pay them tribute not to be aggressive. This has allowed imams to put out contracts on cartoonists from Denmark, producing what they consider insensitive images, or perhaps a blow-up sex doll of Muhammad from Britain with a 7-inch penis, likewise considered insensitive. Nothing can be insensitive. A cartoon cannot be insensitive, as insensitivity resides in the mind of the viewer, as I point out in the segment on obscene art. This belief that it's appropriate to retaliate because of the erroneous idea that something can be insensitive is an example of emotional irresponsibility. It also suggests that the individual who subscribes to Islam has no responsibility whatsoever for his or her acts. I'll come back to this in part 3. The greatest sword verse is Surah 9:5. Let me quote from the Quran. When the sacred months are past, kill the idolaters wherever you find them, and seize them, besiege them, and lie in wait for them in every place of ambush. But if they repent, pray regularly, and give the alms tax, then let them go their way, for God is forgiving and merciful. There are many such verses in the Quran, some less extreme. Islamic scholars state that these differences have to do with Muhammad maturing in his thinking. However, if the Quran is the word of God, then is the God also maturing? As there was no Muhammad, then it has to be Islam maturing in its thinking, as they gained more and more power. With little power, they persuade with words. With power, they persuade with the sword. In a few words, if you are a non-Muslim, you have a large X on your back. You are the enemy, unless you become a Muslim. Just as in Nazi Germany, you are the enemy, and they will do as they please. I have great difficulty understanding how scholars see Islam as a religion. Would the Nazi Party be considered a religion? After all, Hitler was very much involved in occult activities. Another feature of Islam is institutionalized revenge. This is the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth in Jewish law. What this means is that the individual, under his own volition, but usually with the good graces of an imam, can take revenge into his own hands. If a relative is killed, then you have the right to get even, although a payment may be made. Injury short of life should not result in death of the guilty party. And there are strange twists to this. For example, if a Muslim kills an infidel, the Muslim is not put to death. Now, revenge killing might seem like good practice, but it results in ongoing feuds, as is the case in all Middle Eastern countries. In the Islamic condition, we see women raped and whole families wiped out. One of the threats, extortion really, used against those who will not conform to the Islamic position, is the destruction of one's family. Most civilized countries stopped this sort of thing years ago because of the social disruption that results. Allah apparently gets off on human misery, for wherever Islam goes, pain, poverty, and suffering rapidly follows. Somewhere there's a cartoon of Allah lapping up the blood of all those murdered in his name, or ejaculating as an infidel's severed head tumbles to the ground and blood spurts out in all directions. Islam also maintains institutionalized lying, which isn't all that unusual for politicians in this country. But there is a difference in Islam. Lying is celestially sanctioned and called taqiyya, where a person can protect lifestyle and Islamic beliefs by denying participation in Islam or even agreeing with critics about its diabolical objectives, as long as this is not apostasy or a real leaving of the tradition. You see, in Islam, once a Muslim, always a Muslim. Apostates, or those who want out of the system, are killed because this is so offensive to Allah. You can understand how this creates slavery to the system if the only way out is death. Now, it appears that Obama was a Muslim at birth because his father was a Muslim. Like being born into Judaism and Christianity, the infant doesn't get to choose his or her religion, and women have no say in this at all. It is also of interest that if Obama left the fold of Islam, he sure picked an interesting Christian church to attend. That is the congregation of Reverend Jeremiah Wright, who obviously hates America.
Obama can deny being a Muslim as long as his heart is still with Islam. Perhaps Obama's reaction to building the mosque near the trade towers makes more sense now. I'll have more to say about this in the third part of the series. Also, Islam maintains institutionalized slavery. One has to wonder how much slavery goes on in this country in the name of Islam, in the name of Allah. Saudi Arabia embraces slavery, especially of kidnapped black women. Again, the details of all this can be found in Failed God. Islam bears no resemblance whatsoever to a religion of peace. As mentioned, Islam is a political system, no different from that of the Nazi Party in Germany. Moreover, the highest form of spiritual awareness in Islam is martyrdom to the deity. Of course, the imams don't do this, but convince others to strap on bombs and kill men, women, and children, or go on military bases and indiscriminately shoot people. One of the sentiments that convinces Muslims to do this is the belief that this world isn't it. In other words, there's another place, heaven. That's the real place, not here. They justify the killing of what most normal people consider innocent people by saying that if they're good Muslims, then they go to heaven. If they're non-believers, well, they get what they deserve. The Islamic heaven is for the men, for in heaven, women serve men. In the Islamic heaven, one finds a sexual Disneyland, and of course, cold beer without the hangover. One has to wonder what type of person, what type of mental aberration would accept this as truth. So this is a bribe. Offer human sacrifice to Allah and get women and beer. This heaven appeals strictly to the Islamic male's animal nature. There's nothing spiritual in the Islamic heaven, and the women of Islam should feel at the very least insulted and demeaned. It is my opinion that if they could, without fear of being beaten, raped, or murdered, women would bail out of this tradition in countless numbers. As I've stated, the female energy will rebel against this tradition and bring it to reform. The reasons for this will be explained in part 3 of this series. The Islamic community does not permit free speech and has taken steps to destroy free speech and freedom of expression in this country and Europe using violence, as allegedly did Muhammad against those who criticized him and his behavior. If this tradition, like Christianity and Judaism, claims that its constructed history is fact, then it's subject to criticism. Get used to it.
One must keep firmly in mind that Islam is a political tradition involving submission to the deity, whose will is interpreted by the ruler. A person's ultimate allegiance is to Allah, not a country. Perhaps this is why Obama does not pledge an allegiance to this country and the ideals of freedom of the individual and freedom of speech. Remember Joe the plumber? Although the Islamic scholars claim Islam is a religion, perhaps because Allah's name is on the letterhead, there is nothing spiritual in Islam. It is a political system, and there's nothing spiritual about fascism. When we get to Sufism, well, that's another matter. Although there is a statement of individual interpretation of the will of God, symbolically the ruler or teacher, that would be the imam, mullah, or ayatollah, determines the will of God. This is why, depending on the social conditions, God's will can be that of war or peace, or that women are suppressed or allowed equality with males. Again, we hear via the mass media that Westerners misunderstand Islam. Well, this is true, but the fact is the meaning of Islam changes according to the political climate. Jihad one day, peace and love the next. This misunderstanding comes from the Islamic community itself. It is an arbitrary system based on cosmic laws, which are always arbitrarily applied. Liberals in this country who believe that Islam is a religion of peace should go to Iran, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Libya, and Egypt and practice their brand of liberalism. The reality is they would be shot dead on the spot. Be thankful that you can be liberal in this country. But don't abuse the privilege by forcing your opinions on others. In this presentation, then, I have brought to light features of Islam that paint it as a fascist tradition based on constructed celestial law, arbitrarily applied, and this is a tradition that promotes revenge, disinformation, lies, slavery, and terror. Islam also suppresses women's rights, which is strange indeed, seeing they promoted women's rights in the Quran. The Spanish picked up on this after 400 years of military contact with the Moors and transported the idea to the New World and the United States. The rights women have in this country come from Islam. Strange, but true. In the next presentation, I will also consider women's rights and why there is such confusion regarding this issue in Islamic-controlled countries. I will also consider emotional responsibility and cultural sensitivity, and the Islamic insensitivity and intolerance we see plastered on the news media and what it really means. Until next time.